Welcome to Fade to PB8. In today's episode, we'll be coloring in a monkey in a jungle setting that was originally supposed to be a stained glass image, but I decided to give it a little bit more texture. So I'll go ahead and start from the beginning and walk you through step by step. Thank you.
So where to begin? Well, getting started is actually kind of tough sometimes because it's much easier to choose your colors when you have other colors down on the paper. It's easier to choose how light to go, how dark to go, what kind of fades, how much shadow, like where your light source is. But when you're first starting off, like everything is just a blank slate. Everything is white. So it's usually better to start with something that isn't really going to grab the user's attention. This is usually the background for me. In this case, I'm doing the border because no one's really going to look at the border when it's all said and done. You just want it to look nice and you want the colors to kind of match, and you're kind of setting like the tone for the rest of the drawing. So how dark you go with the beginning parts kind of determines how dark you go with the later parts. So here I am. I just decided, now normally I would pick out all of my colors ahead of time. Yeah, I shouldn't say normally, but to get a better result, it's better to pick out all of your colors ahead of time. Now, I have picked out a lot of my colors, and they're just off the screen. I kind of know what they are, so I didn't put them down on the paper below it like I do sometimes. But if you're really struggling to pick out your colors, put them down on a separate sheet of paper, and you can kind of compare them side by side. And another thing to keep in mind is like Ohuhu's coding system. Like that last digit or 2 digits is going to tell you how dark to go or how dark each color is. So if you're not really certain, like, oh, I want this, the border's kind of red. Maybe the border goes up to like 11 out of, I think it goes up to 16, the darkness scale, for the regular colors. And maybe I want the background to go maybe slightly darker than that. So maybe I'll go to like 13 or 14 on the darkness scale. So use the Ohuhu's coding system to help you out. Now, you'll notice when I'm doing the background here, I've actually colored in everything the lightest blue that I have. I'm doing a fade, so it's going to go lighter to darker as you go outward from the monkey. But what I did is I colored everything a very light blue. And that's just to help me determine like where exactly my background is. Because when everything is white, sometimes it's hard to tell. Is this part of a leaf? Is this part of the background? Is this part of a butterfly? It could be anything. So just by putting down that light blue, it just helps me get started. And even though the ink will have dried by the time I revisit it with the darker colors towards the outside, it's totally fine. Like you can go over a light section, and the ink will behave just the same, just as long as you haven't completely saturated that section of the drawing. But 1 or 2 layers is totally fine, especially if you're using like a thicker paper. I'm using 80-pound paper. That's kind of my new standard. I used to do 65, but I actually found that would take some damage if you went over it too many times. But 80 pounds seems to be like a really good number. And you'll see what I'm doing here is I'm just gradually going light to dark as I go outward, but I revisit those lighter markers. So if the markers are labeled like 1 through 5, light 1 being lightest, 5 being the darkest, I'll start off with 1, then I'll go to 2. Then there'll be a line between 1 and 2. So I'll come back to 1 and kind of try to get rid of that line. Then maybe I'll go up to 3, then 2, then 1, then 4, then 3, then 2, then 5, then 4, then 3, and maybe all the way back to 1. But basically, you're starting light, you're working your way dark, and then you're kind of using those lighter markers to kind of blend everything, the colors together, because there might be a line between one color to another. So use those lighter markers as blenders. You won't really change the color very much with them, but it will blend it quite nicely. So I decided to do the tree second because that kind of is adjacent to a lot of the leaves and the monkey and other things going on. And so by putting the colors down for that tree, I can kind of use that to pick out my colors for, say, the leaves or the flowers. And it'll help determine like how dark I want to go. It's important to note, like, I always say go light to dark. And the reason why is you're kind of molding your image like a piece of clay. And if you start with the dark colors, like, you're kind of just going for the Hail Mary. And we just want to do 3 or 5 yard runs until we reach the end zone instead of just going straight for the Hail Mary when we don't have to. The only time you really go for that Hail Mary and go for the final color, that's if you've already put down enough layers of ink that you can't really put down much more, and then you're pulling out that final marker. But hopefully that's not a problem. Hopefully you're using paper that's thick enough and that won't happen. So we just want to gradually get our way up there. But like when you're drawing on a section, just keep in mind, like, how dark can this actually go? If you're doing skin, for example, the person could have very, very light, pale skin, or they could be, African American and have very, very dark skin. And there's a big range in between. So you can start with the very pale skin, and as you apply more and more shadows and more colors, maybe you mess up a little bit, and all of a sudden the person's skin gets a little bit darker. That's totally fine. You can keep working your way up until the person is African American, if you really wanted to. But something with a leaf, I can only go so dark on it before it doesn't look natural anymore. So I want to keep in mind, like, how dark can I make this thing go and still have it look good? Because if I mess up, I can always go darker, but it still has to be in the realm of reality, for lack of a better term. Now, when I'm doing these leaves, you'll notice that I'm scattering around a bunch of different colors, and I do this for a few reasons. Number one, you don't want to just be monotone. Have a lot of similar colors and just kind of mix them all together. I'll probably go over each section of the drawing, 4 or 5 times. And I know it uses a bit more ink, but the end result is really a lot nicer than if you just use one marker. Now, the other reason, there's a few reasons I use multiple markers this way. The second reason is that if you use one marker for all those leaves, you would end up running out of ink with that one marker. And then on the next drawing, if you want to use that same color, then you're out of luck. Then you're out of your favorite leaf green. So blend a bunch of different colors together, and you'll use the ink from the different markers at a similar pace. And that way, hopefully, when you have to replace a couple markers, you're really replacing your whole set at once. It's just a lot nicer that way. And then, I'm just scattering the colors to give it a more natural look. I'm not really thinking too much about where each color goes. I'm just looking for an uneven distribution of ink right now. Maybe darker colors will go towards the center of the leaf. Maybe lighter colors, the yellows, kind of my highlighter, can kind of go towards the edges. And I have greens out, I have yellows, and I have yellow greens. The yellow green is going to be right in between, right in the middle. So if I go to green and I want to make it more yellow green, I'm actually better off pulling out a yellow marker as opposed to trying to correct it with a yellow green marker. So you can really kind of jump from the green to the yellow to make a yellow green. I know that sounds pretty obvious, but it actually took me a little while to figure that one out. So I'm still working the leaves here and just adding some shadows. And again, with the shadows, I'm not going super, super dark. But I'd like to add those darker colors towards the end, just because I like to apply it to wet ink. It's just easier to correct mistakes. If you make a mistake with a dark marker on dry paper, it is very hard to correct. You're going to end up making everything else around it a lot darker, just so it fits into its environment. But when you do the darker markers on wet ink, you can actually go quite a bit lighter. You can transition fairly well. Just the paper that you use will have a limit to how many layers you can put down. So I'm using 80-pound paper, and the limit's probably like 15 to 20 layers if I had to guess. So I'm not going crazy with those lighter colors in parts that I know I'm going to go darker at. But at the same time, I'm not going straight to the dark colors. I want those dark colors to come into play maybe after I've put down like 4 or 5 layers. Now also keep in mind, like, the ink is drying. As you're working on this, the ink is drying. So the section that you're working on, the size of it and how long it takes to do one pass of the entire section, it makes a big difference. I was doing all the leaves at once. And just to do one pass through, by the time I finish the first pass through, that first layer of ink will mostly be dry. So that's why I did like probably 4 or 5 different layers with lighter markers before I introduced the medium markers. And I did a couple layers with that before I introduced the darkest markers. And it just looks nicer, and by doing it that way, when you apply the darker markers, it will be onto wet paper, or at least damp paper. Not like fully saturated. There's a happy medium between dry and fully saturated. And just with experience, you'll find that happy medium. Generally, paper that's more wet will blend together a little bit better. So you'll have like a softer shadow, for example. And then paper that's a little bit drier, you'll end up getting a harder shadow. And it's just a little bit harder to correct mistakes with the drier paper. But, you know, it uses less ink, and it's time consuming to go over this whole paper 5, 6, 7 times. So that pretty much wraps up this drawing. Just making some corrections to the flowers here. But, you know, this one turned out really nicely. Yeah, so let me know what you think in the comment section below. You know, this is a relatively new channel. I've only got, as of right now, I've got 32 subscribers, and I have over 20 videos. So at my current rate, it'll take me about 1 trillion years to reach Mr. Beast or whoever. But that's not really my goal. My goal is just to have fun and enjoy this channel. So hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you very much for watching. Really appreciate it. Thank you.